Well, welcome, guys. It is the top of the hour. Thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate those of you that threw in your favorite social media into the chat. That was our Inquiring Minds question today. And part of that is because kids are social and they're social beings. And tonight we're going to be talking about project-based learning. And when I think about project-based learning, I think about the social part of project-based learning. Those of you that are just joining us and haven't been with the Portrait of a Nevada Learner Pedagogy series, all of these are recorded and they can be found on the Nevada Department of Education website. So sometimes you'll hear me say, oh, remember when we did that in a learner profile class, or we did that in the station rotation class or in the ownership class. Those are all recorded and they can be found on the Nevada Department of Education YouTube site. My name is Kim Loomis. I used to be the director for online and blended learning down in Clark County. I did retire in 2019, but they say that when you retire, that you need to follow your passion. And my passion was not board meetings and not getting invoices through the accounting office, but it was really the passion of building learning spaces that just intrigue our students and get them actively engaged in the learning environment. I did 10 years in the classroom of the high school mathematics before I went into building administration, teacher professional development, did also virtual school administration, a high school reform manager, and a curriculum coordinator. Did write a book. It's called Think Outside the Box. And that's really my mantra. I try to get people to think outside the box. So hopefully tonight I'm going to push your limits and have you think beyond the four walls of your classroom, pushing on those walls outside the box. Tonight's agenda, well, we started already with our welcome. We'll talk a little bit about the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. We'll move into some student-centered learning, really hit hard and heavy project-based learning and the elements of project-based learning, or what I like to call PBL. And then you'll have an opportunity to take this learning here, this 60 minutes that you're with me on the intro, to take it a little bit learning into your classroom and get an additional 5 hours of professional development credit if you want to go ahead and implement it in your classroom and reflect on that. We'll talk more about that at the end, but that Canvas classroom is there. You've all been enrolled in it. You could use it like a magazine and go in and look at some of the things that are in there, or you can, implement it in your classroom and get those 5 additional hours of professional development. All right, before we get going here, we got quite a few of us. Let's go up into chat. What is one of these words? We've got empower, impact, connect, and thrive. What one of these words below, and they are the 4 categories, as you would, of the Portrait of a Nevada Learner, which one intrigues you the most? Which one of those words are like, Good, we got some coming in. I got thrive. I got some empower. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Dara. Oh, good. A lot of empower, impact, empower. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Oh, good. Look at all these ones coming in. Yeah, when we think of the Portrait of a Nevada Learner, these are the 4 categories that they say that we want to pull out of kids, right? Thriving, impacting, connecting, empowering, and I love the word empower. That's why I see it so much over here in chat, because that just is a really, really strong word, right? But just like our opening question about social media, it's all about connections. And they live in this area of all of these connections and kids having friends that they've never met. It's so funny. Like I said, I've been in Chicago today and I've been working with this group for, I don't know, 2 months now. And all I've ever seen them on is on Zoom. And so it was really nice today when I met them. It was like, hey, look, I get to see your whole body. It's just really nice to have that connection. And so when we go through today and we talk about the 4 areas of the portrait, think about which one of these can you help pull out in your classroom? And how do you pull it out in your classroom? How do you pull out empowerment? How do you pull out thrive? How do you pull out connecting? And tonight, when we go through when we go through PBL, or project-based learning, think about how that rolls out. So when we talk about the Portrait of a Nevada Learner, I want you to know it's not new. It's been around for a while. The official final document, it took about 18 months to almost 2 years to generate and get input from before we got to those 4 categories. Came out in May of 23. Not even a year now did it come out, but it has been out for almost a year. And some of you I know have been with me a while. You've heard a lot about the portrait. Some of you are brand new. This might be the first time you've heard about it, but I will tell you, Sunday night, I actually talked to our superintendent, Joan Ebert, who's the superintendent of Nevada schools. And again, this conversation, Portrait of a Nevada Learner, came up, and she talked about how important it is for us as educators to think about how we change our pedagogy in our classroom to help support, empower, thrive, connect. So let's look at those. And in the chat, I went ahead and I threw up the link to the portrait. It's just a one pager. And what the portrait does is it says, look, we have these academics that we want to combine with durable skills. I said I was in Chicago today. The opening question in Chicago is, what durable skills do you think kids need to learn in schools? And how can schools pull that out? And we did a thing that's called High Five Three. We go around and we high five three people and we talk about it with each of those three people. What is one thing that we think? And when we think of those durable skills, we're thinking about resilience, digital literacy, critical thinking, time management, flexibility, all of those skills. How do we bring those out in the classroom while we're doing mathematics, while we're doing CTE, while we're doing electives? So it's really that balance between academics and skills, using a different mindset and the way we use our pedagogy. So we're not changing mathematics, we're not changing career, we're not having a whole class on the portrait of an Nevada learner, but we're blending it into our regular classroom. And those four areas that we just talked about: empower, connect, impact, and thrive, are the categories that when we're thinking about our students, we want them to say, well, I'm sitting in your classroom, but how is this going to help me make an impact in the world? How's it going to help me thrive beyond the four walls of this classroom, much less beyond 12th grade when I get out of public education? How do I connect with people? How do I sustain relationships, not just in your classroom, but also in the community? And let's go back to that word that we mostly saw a lot over in our chat group over here, was empower. So how do we empower? And tonight, project-based learning is a great way to think of empowering our students. That document that you're seeing up in the chat, and you can get access to it, actually lays out those four categories. The empowering is like, how will I grow in my learning? Connecting, how do I build relationships? And that's collaborating, communication, and teaching them empathy and respect, right? Impacting, not only just impacting the world, but also being critical thinkers and problem solvers. And that's what PBL does. It really gives them a purposeful impact on studying things in mathematics, in science. And you're going to see that tonight as we go through some PBL ideas. And thriving, of course, when we think about thriving, I know oftentimes thriving, it's like, oh, we're humans, we're all going to thrive. But no, no, no. Think about, are they resilient? Are they willing to unlearn something that they may have learned wrong? Or are they willing to be, thinking about that resilience of, oh, I failed, but I can get over that, right? And having that intellectual agility to continue learning and just saying, that's just my first attempt at learning, or my second attempt at learning, or third attempt. And somewhere down the line, I'm going to learn it, because geez, we don't give up on kids, right? We just give them more opportunities. And the last one here is really important, especially as we're dealing in this world of AI, is that integrity. And what does that mean? And it's interesting, we were talking about social media when I was in Texas last week. I went to an AI session and they had kids in it, and they said that they would never use AI to cheat when they respect the teacher. And that's so funny, because we're going to talk about relationships now. And I don't say funny, but if we have a relationship with the teacher, they're less likely, of course, as we know, to cheat. Okay, so tonight, what we're going to really talk about, and we started in the social media part, we want to talk about connecting, because it's hard to do a project on your own. When you think about projects in the world, right, even in your home, right, even in like a birthday party you're putting on, or if you're doing a project with the neighbors, you're doing some landscaping. Oftentimes you're not doing it by yourself. You're doing it with somebody. You're connecting with somebody, and you're listening, and you're sharing ideas, and you're collaborating, and you're trying to build those relationships to say, oh, maybe this is a better way of doing things. So that helps us with being able to communicate our ideas and communicate, what we're thinking, as well as to rethink and relearn, right, with different things. And we can do it with tools like, we just talked about the social media, or we can do it with technology, or we could just do it face to face. Like somebody said, I don't like social media. That's no on the social media. But really what we're trying to do when we're doing all of this connecting is we're really trying to show students how to be empathetic and how to respect people that come from diverse backgrounds and cultures and experiences. So tonight, when we go into our first breakout room, I really want you to think about connecting. I want you to think about, what does connecting look like in your classroom? What are some classroom strategies that come to mind when you think about connecting? How are you connecting classroom strategies? See you in 5. Welcome back, guys. Hopefully you guys got some pretty good ideas from your partners. What I'd love for you to do is go ahead and use the chat there. What are some of the strategies that you're using? As you know, I don't get an opportunity to go into your breakout rooms, so I'd like to know what was talked about in there. Oh, look at that. I love it. Thank you so much for throwing those up there. Good. Small groups love it. Good. Yeah. Today we did this thing, and you heard me say we did this high five three thing where we talked to where we had, and they were cabinet members. So you're talking, big leaders in the schools, and we were talking to them about what are some of the durable skills that kids need. And somebody said relationship building was one of them. And I said, normally when I do high five three, we have to teach kids how to look each other in the eye, to shake hands or just say hello, and then pause
Mhm.
and talk about something, and then saying thank you at the end, because oftentimes they don't get that opportunity to be able to do those things in their classroom. So we do have to do those. I love it. The morning meetings, all those greets, those are great ways. But just teaching the kids, looking each other's eye, thanking them for it, you know, uh, shaking hands, any of those things. I call it solar, where you square up your body and your shoulders are forward, you kind of lean in a little bit. Yeah, helping kids with those things, with connecting, especially our littles and even some of our bigs. They get to a point where they haven't been taught that, and they're 15 years old and they have to go on a job interview and they've got their head down. We have to teach them how to be, heads high, because the core business of schools really is relationships and learning. And so when we talk about connecting, we're really talking about not only connecting us with our kids, but that peer to peer. And that's why kids come to school, right? I love this morning meeting that you guys have, because it gives an opportunity for kids to share things, right? It gives them things about manners, right? Even the shoulder partners, having them, when they do that shoulder partner, to actually square up and look at those shoulder partners, because that relationships becomes so important. And then learning, of course, we're all there at school for learning, but I'm a true believer that this is a hierarchy. Relationships comes first, and then the learning will definitely just flow right in. As we talked about, those kids who talked about would never use AI to cheat when they respect their teacher. Basically, they had a really good, strong relationship with that teacher. When we talk about blended, I know some of you have heard me say this before. I believe in blended personalized learning, which is the wisdom of the teachers plus the adaptability of technology, so that we can create an individualized, personalized learning space for each and every student. And you can see that these icons, the caring teacher with the heart, the technology, and the students, they mean something to me. They mean the 1/3. When we're thinking about planning our classroom, 1/3 using digital content to carry DOK level 1 and 2, so kids can learn a little bit about math, literacy, science, social studies, English, all in a technology low level, so that we can take them to the higher order. And today we're definitely going to go to the higher order when we're talking about project-based learning. And that's 1/3 with the students. That's today. I will tell you, today is when we release that learning to our students, to let them go to that higher order of Bloom's taxonomy, where they're synthesizing, they're creating, they are getting deep into ownership of their own knowledge. And 1/3 of the time, we get to guide the instruction. Sometimes, yeah, we're doing it with playlists or projects or small groups, or we can do it with direct instruction or Socratic seminars. But the key here is we're shifting our instruction. And I think that that's where the portrait of the Nevada learner comes in really big. When I was talking to Superintendent Ebert last night, we really talked about how the shift in pedagogy comes about if we want to pull these things in for the portrait. If we really want kids to be resilient, if we want kids to have integrity, if we want kids to have relationships and feel empowered, then we have to step off the stage. So that shift from teacher-led classroom, where we were directing all of the learning, we're going to shift that slowly over to facilitation, where we're doing playlists and we're doing choice boards and we're giving kids projects, so that they're starting to begin to experiment with ownership, so that they can practice that ownership. And when they get really good at that practicing, and they get to understand that they want to take ownership, we could step out. Now it becomes a co-facilitation. We are the lead learner. We're learning right alongside our students in that stage 3. So what does that really mean? That means taking ourselves and moving off of that teacher-centered learning and moving more into a student-centered learning. So if you look at just the role of the instructor there, it's about midway down in the table, going from being the leader and the authority in the classroom to really being more of a learning partner. When you think of the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 2/3 of the time, 2/3 of the time when I release the digital content and when I release to my students, I'm a facilitator. I'm teaching by walking around, and students are actively engaging. They're taking ownership in their learning, and they're posing questions, and they're going to do that with PBL a lot tonight. And they're learning from their errors. Like we said, it's not failing. It's just my first attempt of learning. So when we move to that student-centered green column over there, we get a more collaborative, supportive environment where students are constructing their learning and they're actively engaged in it. But it takes us to design a learning atmosphere for it. So it's not like just let the kids go. It's really about us designing classroom lessons and pedagogy that gets them there. Now, the hard part about this, if kids know how to play school, they don't like it. They really don't. They don't want to shift their mindset. So they got to go from being passive receivers where it's just like, I'm going to sit back and listen to you and I'm going to listen, I'm going to regurgitate, and we're going to get the A and I'm going to move on. No. We're going to change them to that second bullet over there. They're going to be decision makers and creators, especially as we move into project-based learning. They're going to be making decisions. They're going to be creating. They're going to be active agents in their collaborative process as they grow their learning. And that sometimes is they just need practice. They need practice of doing that. And so project-based learning is a great way to give them that practice. So what is project-based learning? Well, it's constructivism. It's Dewey, John Dewey, which is my favorite education guy. It's inquiry-based. It's student-centered. It's really getting our students actively engaged. It's that 1/3 where the kids are working together peer-to-peer to own their ownership. So in the traditional classroom, like we were talking about a moment ago, we tell the kids what they need to know, they memorize it, and they regurgitate it. Nope, done. That was so 1960s. Well, okay, it was in the 1980s too, and maybe even the 90s, but dang, it shouldn't be in the 2024s. What we need to really do is move to that project-based learning where we start with an open-ended driving question, where we're saying, hey, how come it rained today? What makes rain? When do we know it's going to rain? How do the weather guys forecast it, right? Some opening question that we don't have a solution to. And so then we say, okay, well, let's brainstorm some ideas and think about, what do we need to know about rain? And then we could release the kids into learning about rain. And then they can show that they've mastered or learned about this topic in lots of different ways. They might do it as a podcast. They might do it as a slideshow. They might do it as a video. They might do a test, whatever they want to, we give them choices in that new project learning. So when we think about the basic steps to extending that learning, because remember, if we let DOK 1 and 2 be given to the digital content, then we're taking our kids to the higher order stuff, that high stuff in the Bloom's taxonomy. We're going to start with an open-ended question, something that we don't know the answer to, and just let's investigate it. Let's go do some research. And notice, like in this picture, it's peer-to-peer. It's students working together, investigating, sharing what they're learning. And the key here is number 4. Kind of like what we do in our Canvas courses, right? In our Canvas courses, you guys go out and get to do all this stuff, but that number 4 is so important. This is where students are taking ownership of their own learning, when they're reflecting on the process. What step and procedures did they go through to get to their end product? So please, please don't forget when you're doing your projects that you have the open-ended question, you have the kids research, you have them do some type of mastery, but don't forget number 4. That reflecting on the process. What did they learn? How did they learn it? What would they do next time? Just like I ask you guys in the Canvas courses. So here we're going to go back into our breakout rooms, and I want you to think about projects that you've done, because I'm sure that you've done projects, right? So again, turn your cameras on, go talk to your friends. Let's go ahead and get some breakout rooms going. And what I'd like you to do is I want to talk about what type of projects are you currently using in your classroom. Welcome back, guys. If you got some projects that you shared, please put them over in chat. I want to hear them as well. So if you throw them over in chat, I love it. Research on the freedoms. Love it. We saw some art stuff up here. Great. So when we think about projects, this isn't nothing new, guys. I know that you're doing projects. You're trying to push your kids to the higher order.
I had 60% when I came out here, and now I'm down to 15.
About getting our students to that higher order thinking levels, where we can get them to communicate, collaborate, but we really want to think about Bloom's taxonomy, getting them to that higher order. So let's take a moment and let's watch a quick video. Let's see, the video comes from PBL Works, and they talk about project-based world, because that's what we live in. We talked about it a moment ago. I don't know about you, but when Christmas rolled around, I had to do a lot of project planning and project-based stuff, right? So let's go ahead and look at this video here from PBL Works. It gives us a brief explanation on project-based learning. It's about 3 minutes.
You remember what it was like in school. It was boring. You sat in class, memorized as much as you could, and tried to pass a test at the end. But is that good enough? These days, school can be more interesting and effective by focusing students on work that matters. This is project-based learning explained. Most adults live in a world of projects. Whether it's a job assignment, home improvement, or planning a wedding, we need to actively solve problems. But unfortunately, schoolwork looks more like this than this. Let's take a look at this project-based world. Meet Claire. She was recently presented with a challenge. Her company, Super Suds, makes soap, and it was up to her to find the most earth-friendly way to produce it in the future. Her boss gave her a budget and a few requirements, and it was up to her to come up with a solution. She organized and managed a team who researched the options and created materials summarizing the issues. Claire's team asked for feedback and presented their findings to the boss. Claire came out of the project looking like a rock star, and she learned a lot about green products. If you look closely, Claire's success involved critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, things that aren't often taught in traditional classrooms. The world needs more Claires, so how do we get them? The answer is project-based learning, or PBL. By focusing students on a project, teachers put them on a path that deepens their knowledge and builds skills they'll need in the future. Here's what I mean. Mr. Simmons has always been a good science teacher, and his students do well on Friday's tests. Unfortunately, what they learned was gone by Saturday morning. That wasn't good enough for him. Soon he learned about project-based learning and decided to give it a shot. Mr. Simmons got the idea for his first project on microorganisms when nearly half of his students were suddenly absent with the flu. He asked his students why they thought so many of their classmates got sick at the same time. That lively discussion produced a lot of good questions and a list of things the kids wanted to know. Mr. Simmons then announced their project was to help elementary school kids understand how can we not get sick. After dividing the class into teams, he got them started on the project. It was up to the students to ask questions, research, collaborate, give each other feedback, and figure out the best ways to make their points clear to children. One team chose to make an educational video on the connection between hand washing and avoiding the flu. Another chose to create posters to show how viruses spread. The project teams showed off their final work to an enthusiastic audience of parents and their children at a nearby elementary school. Sitting in the front row was our good friend and local rock star Claire, who saw a bit of herself in the students. It was clear that the project was a success for the students, the audience, and Mr. Simmons. His students practiced critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. The project wasn't about memorization, but learning in depth about viruses and how to prevent spreading disease, a lesson they will never forget. At the end of the presentation, Claire introduced herself to the students and told them that they were rock stars and that the world needs more people who can think like them.
So you can see in this project-based learning, one of the things that happens here is they started with a big question, right? They started with, why did everybody get sick? And that big question led to that brainstorming that we were talking about a moment ago, right? When you think about the sequence of what happens here. So big question leads to some brainstorming. And then what it led to is kids doing research. And they didn't get an end product that looked the same. If you noticed up in chat, I shared one of the projects that I used to do with my kids in algebra is I'd have them make a month and I would have them do the algebra problems and every kid turned in a month. They turned in the same thing. Well, that's not really, it's a project, but it's not project based in that the kids didn't get to own it where they can say, look, Miss Loomis, maybe I don't want to do it as a calendar. Can I do it as something else and I still have 30 problems? Maybe it becomes a puzzle or something like that. Just like in this one, they did videos, they did books, they did brochures. There's lots of different ways to show their mastery. But don't forget number 4. And do you remember what number 4 was? Number 4 is reflecting on that process. We want kids to reflect on their learning so that they can take ownership of the learning. After the kids presented all this to the elementary schools, did they reflect on it? And did they say, well, you know, next time I do a color book or next time I do a video, I want to do it this way. I want to put music in the background, or I want to add more. I want to make a color book where the kids are coloring instead of me coloring. So when you think of project-based learning, I have 2 definitions up here. One definition comes from ISTE and one definition comes from PBL Works, which we just watched their video. But they're both saying the same thing. They're both saying what we want to do is we want to start with this big, large, open-ended question. And we want our students to apply their knowledge to produce authentic products so that they're lively engaged. They're looking at real world applications. They're working peer to peer. We're getting them actively engaged because that's the real world. I don't know about you. I couldn't go in my cubby and just do whatever I wanted to do. Teaching, oftentimes we can put our head down. We got 4 walls. But in most of the jobs, they're going to have to work with other people and they're going to have to do projects with other people. So they need that practice, just like our portrait of an adult learner, to communicate, collaborate, and be creative. Because if we think of something we've done in our classroom, 2 weeks later, if it was just read, 2 weeks later, only 10% of it was remembered, right? 20% if actually somebody read it to me. I like audiobooks. If I see it, now my remembering 2 weeks later is going to go up to 30%. But look at the bottom of this pyramid. When Dale Edgar made this pyramid in 1969, and it doesn't change, guys, when we get out of that passive learning, when we're sitting back and reading and hearing and seeing, but get away from that and we get to the active learning where we're discussing and we're saying and we're doing and we're experimenting, get to the bottom of that pyramid, we remember 2 weeks later, a year later, when finals come around or midterms come around, or somewhere down the line, 70% to 90% of what we were actively engaged in, we will remember. So that's why project-based learning is so important. Thinking about getting to kids being active in the learning process. Now, PBL Works says there are 7 elements for a gold standard project. Okay, this is gold standard. I'm not saying that you're going to be gold standard tomorrow or gold standard by next week or even by next year, but think about what elements can we bring into our current classroom? Can we bring in challenging problems and challenging questions? Can we create sustained inquiry? Can we make it authentic, real world like? Can we give students voice and choice in it? Making sure that we put in that number 4 that we talked about a moment ago, that reflection, that thinking about my thinking, right? That metacognition where they're critiquing not only themselves, but possibly each other and making revisions before they turn in a final product. So again, this is gold standard, guys, gold standard. But what I'm saying is, as we're looking into projects in our classroom, what pieces of this can we slowly bring in? I believe that there are 3 different methods of projects. Right? There's a teacher-driven project. Oftentimes it's a teacher question, teacher activities, and it's a very structured inquiry. And that's okay. That's a good method to start with, especially when we're starting with our kids who haven't done this before. We could have a teacher initiated or student choice, kind of like in our video here, where the teacher poses a question and some possible investigations, and the kids go and boom, they had choices of activities. We guided the inquiry where he just said, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try to teach elementary kids about getting sick, or do we have something that's full-blown student-driven? You probably have heard of passion projects where kids can say, I want to learn more about Japanese because my mom's Japanese and we really don't get to see our relatives in Japan that often. And so it's a student inquiry project where they're learning and it's their passion and they're driving it. So think about the method that you want to try in your classroom. Think about some of those 7 gold standard things that you can bring in to your classroom. But the key here, guys, the key here is to get those 4 C's. Right? To get our kids to the portrait of the Nevada learner, to get them communicating, to get them collaborating, to get them to do the higher order thinking and being creative in how they demonstrate their mastery of knowledge. Now, I think there's really a 5th C here, and that 5th C is curiosity. And that's what project-based learning is all about, is getting our kids to be curious, to want to learn more. We're tricking them into learning, really, when you think about it. If you go into the Canvas course, there's a bunch of stuff in there about PBL Works. They have the driving questions, they have the inquiries. So if you're new at this and you just want to try a project that somebody else has already outlined, guess what? They have a project library. You could actually go into the library and see if they're doing something similar to you're doing right now. This this class itself is going to go through spring break. So this might be a good time to try some of these projects. I don't think we end till like late March. So let's take a moment out. I love John Spencer because he has a great way of explaining what he thinks should happen in project-based learning. And so let's take a moment out. We're going to watch a quick video here.
What happens when teachers design projects that empower students with voice and choice? Students embrace a maker mindset. They define themselves as inventors and creators. They learn to take creative risks. Here they experiment and engage in iterative thinking. When this happens, they embrace a growth mindset and grow resilient. They become problem solvers and systems thinkers. They become divergent thinkers, thinking outside the box. They'll use creative constraint to find original uses for materials. Here they discover it's okay to be different. Often students embrace curiosity and wonder. They become explorers, seeking out new information and thinking critically. They grow more empathetic as they design meaningful products that they launch to the world. On an academic level, students are more engaged and the information sticks. There's often an increase in student achievement. Meanwhile, they learn key skills like project management, collaboration, and communication. True, these projects will prepare students for the creative economy, but more importantly, they empower students for a creative life. Here they see that making is magic. We know that there's a time crunch in schools. Materials can be scarce. Sometimes you're stuck with a tight curriculum map. But when you, as a teacher, empower your students with voice and choice, they become the makers who change the world.
You gotta love it, right? He used the word empower, and if you guys used that word earlier tonight, because you were saying that empower is the one word that intrigues you most when you think of the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. Now, if you go back into the Canvas course, there's more about the launch method. He talks about how to launch a project and what cycle it can go through. That's all there in the course. But I think what he says here, really, when we think about this video, is when we release that 1/3, I'm not saying every day, but a third of the time when we release to our students, can we get them to be creative? Can we get them to be collaborative? Can we get them to think outside the box? And that's what project-based learning is. It's really about getting our kids to expand their learning to that higher order thinking levels. So what are some of the elements that we need to put together for our project-based learning? Because I know that you're all thinking about it. You probably already are doing projects, and how can I take them to a higher order? Now, when we think about projects versus project-based learning, oftentimes projects like my calendar that you saw that I put in chat, it came after. It was like we learned about units in algebra. It was usually something that we did towards the end of the semester. It comes after the learning. And the teacher provided all the directions, and it was typically done at home. That calendar was done at home. I'm like, you guys work on that. And everybody turned in the exact same calendar. It was almost like a recipe. It was really easy for me to grade, but it wasn't probably fun for my kids as much as it could have been, right? When we move to project-based learning, oftentimes what project-based learning says, as we go through this unit of study, let's think about the learning that we need to help drive this project. So there's more of an inquiry. It gives time in class for communication, collaboration, and creation of those end products. And those end products aren't a single product. They may vary, like we saw in the illness there. It could be a color book, it could be a video, it could be a podcast. There's lots of different ways that the kids can show their learning. And that's the little difference between projects and project-based. In this course, as you're rolling out and you're thinking if you want those 5 additional credits and you're going to pull out some projects, I don't care which ones you do. I really don't. I want you to just think about those 7 elements. Are you giving kids voice and choice? Are you giving kids opportunities to vary their end products? Because when you think about project-based, I'm saying, can we get the kids to construct? Can we get the kids to own their own knowledge and create their own knowledge? You've heard of project-based, you've heard of inquiry-based, challenge-based, problem-based, discovery-based, game-based, brain-based. All of them are a constructive approach to learning. because we want the kids to be constructing their knowledge base. We want them to be resilient. We want them to fail. So it's just that first attempt of learning so that they can have a second attempt and a third attempt rather than being passively receiving information. So when you're thinking about your open-ended questions, when you're thinking about your project, thinking about a subject area that you might want to try this in, instead of asking a direct question like something that's Googleable, if a person makes $25,000 a year, how long will it take them to make $1 million? Wouldn't it be better to just ask the kids, what does it mean to be rich? Now that's open-ended, because what does rich mean, right? Instead of Googling what is an atom, how about we say, hey, what did the discovery of the atom, how did that impact science? How did it impact the world? Instead of asking what their favorite character in the book is, maybe ask them how they feel about a character in the book. Instead of asking about the Bill of Rights, ask them about the ways the Bill of the Rights grant and deny freedom. Instead of asking about the colors of the rainbow, ask them to describe a color to someone who's blind. Now, these are some open-ended driving questions. So when you're thinking about your projects, think about how can I create some open-ended questions? Well, there's a couple examples. Now, this is one of my favorite. This is called the GRIT rubric, and it's also in your Canvas course. But this is that number 4 that we talked about earlier, because oftentimes we do projects and they get the products, but what we forget is need them to reflect on the learning. Were they courageous and bold and taking risks? Did they have guts? Were they tough and resilient and reflective and persistent in their project? Did they have resilience? Were they honest and kind to their group? Did they have integrity? Or did they have tenacity? Were they determined? Were they committed? Were they forward thinking? We can have them rate themselves, rate their group members. And again, this rubric is in our Canvas course. I love it. I absolutely love it, because I like when kids can actually think about their thinking, that metacognition. And as we move forward, you also think about, how are you going to grade these projects? I'm a big fan of single point rubrics. This has been my newest thing. I love them, where, you can give them a star rating and some reflection points, or you can do it like a glows and grows, where you're saying, oh, this is an area that you really glowed at, and this is where I think you can grow it. And don't think that you're the only person that has to give feedback. Let peers give feedback to peers, because that's part of that communication, that collaboration, that resiliency, that portrait of an adult learner. We want them to realize that they are impacting their society around them. And that society might be just the group of 3 that they're working with. Now, I got a question for you. As we move forward and we're thinking about our next steps, hopefully you guys want to explore a little bit more about project-based learning, right? Hopefully I've enticed you to think about, can I recreate or maybe remix a project that I've done in the past, and maybe add some things to make it actively engaging, where kids have voice and choice and ownership of their learning.